right, this is the second response that I had to, or I have to W.E.B. Dubois' speech, The Talented Tenth. Before I read this excerpt, I'm going to go ahead and say that I still stand on what I said about the comparison between The Talented Tenth, which is W.E.B. Dubois' speech, and the speech by Booker T. Washington, The Atlanta Compromise. I still stand on what I said, that when you take into the whole collective of our history in the country, that Booker T. Washington was more right than W.E.B. Dubois. Right means more realistic about the expectations and about the history and the culture. That doesn't mean that W.E.B. Dubois did not have any good points. And this video is a rebuttal of the one I made the day previously when I said Booker T. Washington is right. And though I'm no W.E.B. Dubois fan, he says a lot of things that are correct. And today I'm going to read you the excerpt that makes not Booker T, I meant to say Dubois right over Booker T. Washington. The excerpt goes as follows. A university is a human invention for the transmission of knowledge and culture from generation to generation through the training of quick minds and pure hearts. And for this work, no other human invention will suffice, not even trade and industrial schools. On the surface, given how we live now, that sounds naive. But from the point of foundational Black Americans, let me say why W.E.B. Dubois was absolutely correct. You have to understand at the time, two known things were law of the land that compelled him to make this speech, because these two things would greatly come to hurt the Black American community. One being lynchings and the second being Jim Crow. You just knew you couldn't go out at night certain places, and still today we have sundown towns. Today you still have Black men in little small towns being killed under mysterious circumstances. The point about it is if when you're in a system that is stacked against you, you need to attend the very universities, whether they were what we now call HBCUs or the universities that are typically around before HBCUs, and get the knowledge to know how to fight the very system that is oppressing you, whether you're going to win or not. Decades before W.E.B. Dubois, a couple of decades at least, maybe it was a couple of years, who know, Homer Plessy and Plessy versus Ferguson challenged the segregation of Jim Crow. Of course, he lost, but he still had enough of the social standing to challenge it. And you're going to need people with that social standing to challenge it. So, if I'm saying W.E.B. Dubois is right, then I am saying that it made more sense to go to law school, because there were Black lawyers at this time, even if they don't tell you that. There were Black lawyers. If W.E.B. Dubois is correct, you need a certain amount of literacy in people who are smart enough to know the laws of the land and to know the laws of their state. Again, there may have been a high illiteracy rate. Doesn't mean all Black people couldn't read. But what I think W.E.B. Dubois wanted us to learn is that the more people that can read and get the knowledge and education, the more you can fight back on the very system that is oppressing you. And for that time, when Jim Crow was the law of the land in the South, and de facto segregation was the law of the land in the North, and it was just buck wild out in the wild, wild West. That's a whole nother issue I'll have to research someday when I get time. You needed to know how to read and how to interpret the literature, the laws, and to know your own history in order to fight a system that was against you. I have no problem with the fact that W.E.B. Dubois felt that the best men should go to college, though arguably some women went as well. Um, because you're going to need those people who know how to read and interpret the law to get you out of things. I'll give you an example. When emancipation took place, lots of people still stayed on plantation for decades after emancipation. Why? Because they couldn't read the Emancipation Proclamation. It was only interpreted to them, or only interpreted it when their masters wanted them to. Don't get it twisted. Emancipation Proclamation freed a whole lot of slaves. But because information didn't travel fast and the people who were enslaved were illiterate, they did not know that they had been free for decades and continued to live under that tutelage, unfortunately, because they did not know that the Emancipation Proclamation took place, much less likely didn't know how to read it. And then again, in that regard, W.E.B. Dubois is correct. That very suppression kept them somewhere that they should have easily been freed. This education, which he says training of quick minds. When I think he's talking quick minds, I think he's discussing being witty, being able to debate your opponent and fight your opponent who is keeping you in your subjugation and your oppression. Pure hearts, that part of it is in. I don't know if it makes you pure. It makes you more prepared to fight a system that is against you. And he is right. Trade and industrial schools cannot teach you how to read the document that made you free. And trade and industrial schools cannot continue to keep you free from the laws that oppress you and from the amendments that gave you rights that you knew of, were aware of passages, but could not read. It is better to know how to read than to have something dictated to you. And for that reason, W.E.B. Dubois was correct. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.